Hi, I'm Josh Hutchinson, and welcome to the Thing About Salem.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jack.
What stands out about the Salem witch hunt and what sets it apart? While witch hunts have occurred everywhere and continue to occur, Salem stands out as the most culturally significant witch hunt ever. One thing that makes the Salem witch hunt stand out among New England and indeed British witch hunts is the size and scope.
The indiscriminate nature of accusations makes Salem a unique experience in American history. People at the highest levels of society were named as witches.
There's also the fact that this episode began with multiple afflicted people, unlike other episodes in New England, and the accusations spread as the affliction did.
So much attention has been paid to the afflicted people as central in this affair, but I think we need to focus on the people around them, the ones who filed the complaints for them.
The cause of the affliction is not as significant as the reasons why non-afflicted individuals would make witchcraft accusations in response.
More than 150 people were named. Had the court of Oyer and Terminer tried all of them, they may all have been hanged.
So they all faced that terror in the dungeons where they were chained to prevent their specters from roaming. As more and more people were hanged, that terror must have risen beyond panic levels.
The Salem witch hunt was much larger than any other American witch hunt in every way. Only a handful of times in New England did you have more than 2 people accused of witchcraft and tried simultaneously.
In fact, there were only 2 witch hunts in New England that resulted in more than 2 convictions. The Hartford witch panic of 1662-3 resulted in 4 convictions, and the Salem witch hunt 30 years later resulted in 30.
The Stanford-Fairfield witch hunt of 1692 yielded multiple accusations, but resulted in only 1 conviction, and that was overturned.
3 decades of progress were overturned with the admission of spectral evidence by the Salem court. Since the end of the Hartford witch panic, New England courts had not accepted this testimony.
Indeed, multiple witnesses had been required to testify to the same event, meaning 2 or more people would have to see the same specter at the same time in order for the event to be admitted as evidence.
But the judges of the court of Oyer and Terminer found a way around this. By having the afflicted persons in the courtroom with everyone else, everyone in the room became a witness to the afflictions in action.
And for some reason, nobody on the court ever seriously doubted the afflicted person's ability to identify the people behind the shapes they saw.
True. There was debate about whether they saw the real person or an imposter, Satan in disguise.
But there wasn't much debate or questioning of the afflicted person's veracity and spectral acuity.
The court made exceptions to some other rules as well. Accusers were not required to post bond, as was customary to show they were earnest about their accusations. This allowed individuals to make numerous complaints.
In the 36 years before Salem, Massachusetts hanged only 1 witch that was a usual suspect. She was Goody Glover, an Irish woman and Gaelic speaker hanged in November of 1688.
What caused the Salem witch hunt? Fear caused the Salem witch hunt. Plain and simple, the fear of witches was real and still is for many people around the world. This fear is so potent that it leads people to take drastic actions they would never otherwise take. It can be compared to the level of fear of terrorists experienced by Americans on 9/11.
Witchcraft represented an existential threat, as did London's whims. At the time the Salem witch hunt occurred, there was also real fear around whether the Massachusetts Bay Colony would survive as a godly colony, to use their term for those practicing the Congregationalist faith better known as Puritanism.
London had revoked the Massachusetts Charter in 1684. King William issued a new charter in October 1691, but that charter did not take effect until the new governor arrived in Massachusetts in May 1692.
And that new charter would force Massachusetts to tolerate religious beliefs and practices other than mainline New England Puritanism. So long as they were Protestant, people of any religious affiliation could now vote, effectively ending the Puritan theocracy that had been in place since 1629.
At a time when Cotton Mather was predicting the literal end of the world was near, the world really did end for the Puritans after a fashion.
Many factors contributed to an atmosphere of terror in New England in 1692.
There was economic crisis, war, refugees, bad weather, epidemics, loss of self-identity as a religious model for the world, political uncertainty, religious strife, growing pains, continued preaching on the devil and witches, and more.
A lot of preconditions were present, which created a ripe atmosphere for a witch hunt.
It was the economy, stupid. The Massachusetts economy crisis of the 1690s meant people were struggling to get by.
To this day, economic uncertainty remains a key driver of witch hunts. When you aren't doing well, you look for people to blame.
War lay behind the economic woes. King Philip's War was, per capita, the bloodiest and costliest war in American history.
And now King William's War was being fought on New England's frontiers. As the front lines advanced, ever closer to the heart of Massachusetts settlements, fear of Native Americans became a familiar refrain, visible in some Salem witch hunt testimony.
As one town in Maine or New Hampshire fell after the other to the combined forces of the French and the Wabanaki Confederacy, the war still remained far enough removed from Salem, just far enough that it was not a constant preoccupation of the people of Salem and surrounding communities.
Thus, it was a pressing enough concern to cause fear, consternation, and the desire to have revenge on the colony's enemies.
As refugees from the north and east fled to Essex County, the northernmost county in Massachusetts, fear was heightened, eventually requiring a release of pressure.
Disease was another factor. As COVID has left a deep emotional scar on the world today, outbreaks of smallpox and other communicable diseases left deep scars on the people of colonial New England.
Like today, people wanted answers to what caused the outbreaks.
And such an outbreak had occurred in 1690, following a disastrous military expedition to Canada when hundreds of men returned home sick.
The town of Andover blamed Martha Carrier and her family for bringing the smallpox there that year.
Weather also contributed to a gloomy atmosphere in 1692, which happened to fall within the Maunder Minimum, an especially cold period of the Little Ice Age.
From the start of settlement, Orthodox New England Congregationalism or Puritanism had never actually been the complete monopoly its adherents intended to create in the so-called New World.
Even in the early years of Massachusetts settlements, dissenters were being exiled from the colony. Later conflicts would emerge with Quakers, Baptists, Anglicans, and anyone else not following the official line.
And the Puritan orthodoxy was itself no stranger to division, such as the controversy about the halfway covenant, which put individual churches at odds with one another and even internally.
Over the generations, church membership had declined, and ministers believed Christians were backsliding into sinful ways.
The halfway covenant was a more liberal church membership policy intended to allow grandchildren of church members to be baptized, whether or not the children's parents had made a public confession of faith and signed the church covenant.
It, in effect, made baptized people halfway members of the church with the privilege of having their children baptized without the right to take communion.
This new way of allowing more children to be baptized did not sit well with many ministers and other leaders who wanted congregants to stand before the church members and speak of their conversion experience in order to gain access to the sacraments.
These individuals wanted their churches to be composed of born-again or regenerate Christians. They did not want unregenerate people taking advantage of sacraments with unclean hearts.
In other words, they wanted assurance their churches were made up of God's elect, his chosen people.
Thanks to New England's congregational system, each church chose independently whether to adopt the halfway covenant or not.
For decades, many of the leading churches opposed the move. However, by the end of the 17th century, 4/5 of the churches had adopted the halfway covenant.
The church in Salem adopted the covenant in 1654, but when the Salem Village Church was gathered in 1689, Minister Samuel Parris and the powerful Putnam family opposed the new covenant and required proof of regeneracy.
On top of all these factors, there was great political uncertainty. The very fate of the Puritan experiment lay in the balance.
In 1629, Massachusetts Bay Colony was issued a charter which allowed the company to establish a government. This enabled the creation of government by the so-called godly, which executed Quakers and drove antinomians out of the colony.
These extremist actions and others did not sit well with England, and King Charles II revoked the charter in 1684.
In 1686, King James II installed a new royal governor to look after all of England's northern American colonies from Connecticut to Maine.
This new royal super colony, the Dominion of New England, was lorded over by Edmund Andros, who forced the New England Puritans to tolerate other Protestant religious sects and used Puritan meeting houses for Anglican services.
The Dominion was expanded in 1688 to include New York and New Jersey and was dissolved in 1689 when King William and Queen Mary ascended to the throne of England, Scotland, and Ireland, etc., etc.
Which they actually wrote on documents. You see that in many of the court documents from Salem, King and Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland, etc., etc. It just wasn't worth writing it all out. But Massachusetts leaders replaced the Dominion temporarily with their own interim government of their pre-1686 boundaries, which included Maine.
This interim government was replaced by the Charter of 1691, which was implemented beginning in May 1692.
So there's this air of mystery that hangs around the Salem witch trials. Despite us knowing all the facts we've outlined already, one common misconception about the witch hunt is that we don't know what caused it.
We don't, do we?
Well, we actually do.
Well, what was it then?
It was all those things we just discussed: warfare, an economic crisis, disease, weather, religious strife, political uncertainty, decades of neighborly disputes, etc.
But what ailed the afflicted persons?
Theories, many of them discredited but still widely believed, unfortunately, include ergotism, encephalitis, meningitis, epilepsy, sexual abuse, sleep paralysis, conversion disorder, mass psychogenic illness, PTSD, other biological explanations, or just plain fraud.
I read that the afflicted were in fits in court and during nightmares, but calm as anyone else in between.
That's what was written about them, and there are a couple of theories on that. The afflicted persons were perpetuating willful fraud, or perhaps they were legitimately terrified whenever they were in the presence of the people who they believed were harming them.
Despite what you may read on Wikipedia, one thing we know for sure is that the afflicted did not present the symptoms of ergotism, which include both convulsive and gangrenous effects.
The fits described by observers of the afflicted people were not described as seizures or epilepsy, which were well known to people of the 17th century.
The symptoms don't match encephalitis, Lyme disease, or meningitis.
Some have proposed other physical ailments, while others believe a psychogenic illness such as conversion disorder was involved. With conversion disorder, the subject's mind converts psychological distress into physiological conditions.
Given the conditions we have discussed already, especially the warfare, you can understand there were many traumatized individuals and widespread fear. While it is impossible to reconstruct someone's mental state based upon scant historical records, PTSD is a strong possibility for many of the afflicted persons, as several had witnessed family members being killed, and some had been captured and taken to Canada, where they were redeemed for cash or freed in prisoner swaps.
And some say signs of sexual abuse were present in some testimony, such as that of Mary Warren about her relationship with John Proctor, who also allegedly referred to her as his jade, a term for an inferior or worn-out horse.
Many other people whom we don't think of as afflicted were troubled by nightmares and sleep paralysis.
There's no one-size-fits-all explanation for the afflictions. A variety of theories have been proposed, but many don't hold water. And I think we should focus more on why the people were willing to believe the accusations against their friends, family, and neighbors.
So why don't we spend more time considering the supposedly rationally thinking adults and less on the kids who are clearly occupying a different mental space?
Understanding the actions of the colony's leaders and the accusers is critical to learning the lessons we need to learn from the witch trials. We have to understand the true fear of witchcraft, Satan, and utter destruction that was experienced by the people involved. We have to identify when and how fear overcame reason and the rush to judgment that followed.